Please, Zara. You're my friend. Don't do this to me. Faith's voice shook as she stood there, holding her two daughters close. But Zara only smiled, a slow, wicked smile. I just came to take what was always mine, Zara said. Before Faith could even understand what was happening, Daniel, her husband, stepped forward and threw them out. The little girls cried as Faith fell to her knees on the cold ground, her heart shattering into pieces. And as the door slammed shut, Zara locked it from inside, laughing. So, sit back as we dive into this painful story of betrayal, wicked friendship, and a shocking twist no one saw coming. Faith had never been the kind of woman who needed a spotlight. She was the kind of woman who arranged flowers on the dinner table even when no one was coming over, who remembered everyone's birthday, who cooked extra portions of everything because someone might stop by. She was warmth made human, the type of person who made wherever she was feel like home. She had married Daniel 7 years ago in a small ceremony with wildflowers and borrowed chairs, and she had loved him the way she loved everything, completely, without condition, without strategy. Daniel had been different then, softer. He laughed easily, held her hand in public, called her from work just to say he was thinking of her. When Emma was born, he cried in the delivery room. When Chloe came along 2 years later, he stayed up all 3 nights of the hospital stay, refusing to leave. That Daniel, the one who had danced with her in the kitchen at midnight and taught Emma how to tie her shoes on a Sunday morning, felt now like a story someone else had told her. Zara had come into their lives the same way most beautiful disasters do, slowly, then all at once. They had met at a community class 11 years ago. Zara was glamorous in the way that turns heads in a room. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, the kind of effortless confidence that made people lean toward her like plants toward sunlight. Faith had admired her immediately, in the uncomplicated way kind people admire beautiful things. Zara had been charming from the start, generous with compliments, attentive. She remembered things Faith mentioned in passing the name of her childhood dog, the way she took her coffee, the anniversary she and Daniel celebrated every March. It felt, at the time, like the mark of a truly good friend. Faith had no way of knowing that it was the mark of a woman who was studying her. Over the years, Zara became a fixture in their home. Sunday lunches, school pickup coverage when Faith ran late, holiday dinners where she sat across from Daniel and laughed at all his jokes a half-second longer than necessary. Faith saw none of it. She had trusted Zara with the keys to her house, her children, and her heart. She had told her things she had never told another living soul, her fears, her insecurities, the small cracks that had started to appear in her marriage as Daniel grew quieter, more distant, more difficult to reach. And Zara had listened to every word, catalogued it, and used it. The weeks before the night they were thrown out had been strange. Daniel had started coming home late. Not dramatically late, just enough. 30 minutes here, an hour there. He smelled of a perfume that wasn't Faith's when she leaned in to kiss him, and he turned his cheek at the last second so that her lips grazed air. "Is everything okay?" Faith had asked him one evening, standing in the kitchen doorway. "I'm tired," he said, without looking up from his phone. She had gone to Zara, of course, sat in her friend's perfectly decorated apartment and poured out her worry like water from a cracked cup. "He's pulling away," she told Zara. "I don't know what I did. I don't know how to reach him anymore." Zara had placed a warm hand on hers. "Men go through phases," she said gently. "Don't panic. Just give him space. Give him space." What Zara had actually meant was, "Step back so I can step in." Looking back, Faith could trace the pattern with terrible precision. Every time she shared a vulnerability, Zara used it as a roadmap. Every time Daniel expressed a frustration to Zara, which Faith would later learn happened more and more often, Zara amplified it, shaped it, turned it into a reason, a justification, a push. She had been dismantling Faith's marriage the way a skilled thief dismantles a lock one tiny tumbler at a time, so quietly you never hear the mechanism breaking until the door is already swinging open. By the time Faith realized what was happening, it was already over. Zara had shown up that final night under the guise of returning a casserole dish. Emma had opened the door, delighted she adored Zara, called her Auntie Zed, drew her pictures at school. Within an hour, the conversation had shifted in ways Faith still couldn't fully reconstruct. There had been accusations, strange ones, distorted, things she didn't recognize as her own actions, but that were presented back to her as her failures. Daniel's voice had risen. Zara had stood very calmly to one side, interjecting at precise moments, like someone operating a machine she had built herself. And then the door had opened, and Faith and her daughters had walked through it. They walked for 20 minutes before Faith's legs stopped working. She sat down on the curb of an unfamiliar street, and Emma and Chloe pressed themselves against her, and she held them in the dark and did not cry, not because she wasn't broken, but because she was their mother, and if she fell apart right now, there would be nothing left for them to hold on to. "Mama, where are we going?" Emma asked. "I'm figuring it out, baby. Can we go back to Daddy?" Faith pressed her lips to the top of Emma's head. Not tonight. They had no bags. Faith had grabbed her phone out of instinct, but her wallet was still inside the house. She scrolled through her contacts with shaking hands, trying to think of who to call, and realized, with a hollow horror, that almost everyone she knew she had known through Zara or through Daniel. The friendships had blurred together over the years into one shared circle, and now she couldn't tell who belonged to her and who had only ever been borrowed. She was still staring at her screen when headlights swung around the corner, followed by the slow crunch of tires on gravel as an old sedan pulled to a stop beside her. The window rolled down. An older woman leaned out, maybe 65, silver-haired, with reading glasses perched on her head and the unhurried expression of someone who had seen enough of life to stop being surprised by its cruelties. "Are you all right?" the woman asked. "We're fine," Faith said automatically. Then she looked down at her daughters. Chloe was shivering. Emma had tear tracks drying on her cheeks. Faith was barefoot. "No," she admitted. "We're not." The woman's name was Mrs. Carter. She lived 4 streets away in a house that smelled of cedar and old books, with a kitchen that was warm before you even walked into it, and a guest room that had 2 beds, as though it had always been waiting for exactly 2 small girls. She asked no questions that first night. She simply heated soup, found socks that fit Chloe's feet well enough, and told Emma that the blanket she was wrapping around her had belonged to her own granddaughter, and that it was very good at keeping bad feelings out. When the girls were asleep, Faith sat at the kitchen table, and finally cried. Mrs. Carter placed a cup of tea in front of her and sat down across from her without speaking. She let Faith empty out completely all the grief, the rage, the humiliation, the disbelief, and when it was done, she said only this: "You are not where you ended. You are where you begin." Faith didn't fully understand it that night, but she would remember it. 3 days after throwing Faith and her daughters out, Zara rearranged the furniture. She started with the living room, moved the couch, got rid of the throw pillows Faith had chosen, replaced the family photos on the wall with a large abstract print she'd had in storage. The kitchen came next. Faith's spice rack, her handwritten recipe cards tucked into the cabinet drawer, her daughter's crayon drawings stuck to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets, all of it gone, replaced, erased. Within a week, there was almost nothing left in that house to suggest that Faith had ever been there. This was not coincidental. It was deliberate. Zara understood, with the particular intelligence of someone who had spent years planning this, that a space carries memory, and she needed Daniel to stop remembering. She cooked for him, kept the house spotless, smiled warmly at him over the breakfast table, and said the right things at the right times. She was, in every visible way, everything she had convinced Daniel that Faith was not, but controlling people, as all controllers do, she overplayed her hand almost immediately. When Daniel mentioned calling Emma to check in, Zara found a reason subtle, articulate, why it wasn't a good idea right now. When he received a call from his colleague James and lingered in the hallway talking and laughing, she appeared in the doorway with a look on her face that made him wrap the call up faster than he'd planned. When he sat quietly one evening, staring at nothing, she demanded to know what he was thinking about, and when he said nothing, her eyes narrowed in a way that made the word feel like a trap. Daniel had traded one life for another. He just didn't know yet what he'd actually bought. Faith found a job at a bakery 2 weeks after landing at Mrs. Carter's. It paid almost nothing, and she arrived before dawn and left smelling of flour and sugar, and her feet ached every evening, but she went back every morning. Emma and Chloe were enrolled in the nearby school Mrs. Carter helped navigate the paperwork, sat with Faith through forms that made her head spin, and quietly paid the first month's bus fare before Faith could protest. "You'll pay it back when you can," Mrs. Carter said. "And if you can't, you'll do it for someone else instead. That's how it works." The girls were struggling. Emma had gone quiet in a way that frightened Faith, not the peaceful quiet of a child at rest, but the careful quiet of one who had stopped trusting that her feelings were safe to express. She did her homework without being asked, helped set the table without being told, and at night, when she thought no one could hear, she cried softly into her pillow. Chloe, by contrast, had become clingy and prone to sudden weeping over small things, a dropped spoon, a wrong-coloured cup, anything that felt like one tiny loss too many, stacked on top of all the bigger ones. Faith held them both as much as she could. She read to them every night, even when her eyes burned with exhaustion. She made up stories about brave girls who lived in unusual places and discovered that unusual places could become home. She tried, in every way she knew, to be big enough for all 3 of them. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, something started to shift in her. The woman who had once needed someone else's approval, someone else's presence, someone else's validation to feel steady, That woman was still there, but she was changing shape, hardening in some places, softening in others, growing roots where she had only ever been flowers. She started baking at home on her days off, experimenting, and when Mrs. Carter's neighbour tasted her lemon drizzle cake and immediately offered to pay for another one, something sparked behind Faith's eyes that hadn't been there before. A thought. A small, dangerous, wonderful thought. What if I did this myself? James had worked alongside Daniel for 4 years, and in that time he had developed a quiet, reliable read of the man. Daniel was not a bad person. That had always been James's assessment. He was simply not a strong one. He needed to be liked. He needed to be needed. And he had a blind spot, as emotionally dependent people often do, for those who made him feel most seen, even when the seeing was strategic. James had noticed Zara long before anyone else thought to look. It started with small things. The way she appeared at Daniel's workplace events, even when Faith was not invited. The speed with which she always had an opinion when Daniel mentioned attention at home. The specific questions she asked about Faith, always framed as concern, always angled in ways that placed the emphasis on Faith's shortcomings. He'd mentioned it once, gently, to Daniel. "I get a strange feeling from her," he'd said, choosing his words carefully, like she's working towards something. Daniel had laughed it off. "You don't know Zara. She's just a good friend to Faith." James hadn't pushed. You couldn't push Daniel. He shut down at the first sign of conflict, but he had kept watching. After Faith and the girls were thrown out, James made a quiet decision to start paying closer attention. What he found, slowly, through conversations with people who had known Zara before she'd entered Daniel and Faith's lives, was more alarming than he'd expected. Zara had done this before, not identically, but the pattern was there. A woman she befriended, a man she decided she wanted, a careful, extended campaign of erosion. The previous situation had ended differently. The woman had left of her own accord, and Zara had stepped in, and the relationship had lasted about a year before Zara ended it when she grew bored. More than that, James discovered that Zara had financial reasons for attaching herself to Daniel specifically. Not romantic ones, practical ones. Daniel's name was connected to a small property investment he and Faith had made together 3 years ago, a quiet little asset that Zara, who had done her research thoroughly, knew about. An asset that if she could get herself into the right position in Daniel's life, she could access. This had never been about love. It had never even been about Daniel. This had been about Faith's life, and Zara's calculated decision to take it from her, piece by piece, for reasons that were equal parts envy and strategy. James wrote it all down, and then he started thinking about what to do with what he knew. 3 months after Faith was thrown out, she had 12 regular cake and pastry orders per week. It wasn't much, but it was growing. She had set up a simple page online, Mrs. Carter's granddaughter, visiting for the weekend, had helped her do it in an afternoon, and the orders had started coming in slowly, then not so slowly. She moved herself and the girls into a small rented flat above a pharmacy on a quiet road. It had low ceilings and a drafty kitchen window, and a landlord who was elderly and slightly deaf and generally left them alone. Emma decorated the walls with drawings. Chloe named the drafty window Mr. Whistle. They were building something. It looked nothing like what they'd had, but it was theirs in a way their old life had never entirely been. Meanwhile, in the house that had once been Faith's home, cracks were appearing. Daniel had always needed peace to function, order, ease, the steady hum of a household that ran smoothly. He had not understood, until it was gone, how much Faith had maintained that quiet, with no audience and no acknowledgement. Zara did not maintain it. Zara directed it. There was a difference. She told him how to arrange his evenings, commented on his friendships, grew cold when he laughed too loudly at something she hadn't said. She catalogued every small deviation from what she considered appropriate and presented it back to him later, calmly, as evidence of something he needed to examine. Daniel was not stupid. He was weak, but weakness can coexist with intelligence, and slowly, painfully, he began to feel the walls of what he had walked into. He thought about Emma, about the way she'd said "Daddy, please" in that small, trembling voice as the door was closing. He thought about Chloe reaching for him with one tiny hand, and him turning away from her. Those thoughts came to him most at 3 a.m, when Zara was asleep and the house was quiet and there was nothing between him and what he had done. He reached for his phone one night and typed Faith's name into the message app, stared at the blank text field for a long time. He didn't send anything, not yet. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, when the girls were at school and Faith was packaging orders at Mrs. Carter's kitchen table, the older woman sat down across from her with 2 cups of tea and the expression of someone who had been waiting for the right moment to say something. "I was married for 31 years, Mrs. Carter said. "Good marriage, hard marriage, the kind that teaches you things you'd rather not know about yourself." Faith looked up. "My husband had a brother," Mrs. Carter continued, wrapping both hands around her cup. "Charming man. Everyone loved him. He borrowed money from us twice and never paid it back, and each time he had a reason that was completely reasonable and completely his fault at the same time. I kept telling Robert that was my husband. I kept saying, 'I love your brother,' but he takes things from people and calls it receiving. Robert didn't want to see it. He loved his brother. Love makes us generous with our perception." She looked at Faith steadily. "Some people come into your life looking like gifts," she said. "They know how to look like gifts. It's a skill. But a gift that costs you everything you have isn't a gift. It's a very slow theft." Faith stared into her tea. "I keep thinking," Faith said quietly, "about all the things I told her, all the things I handed her. I thought I was trusting my friend. I was handing someone a map to everything I loved." "Yes," said Mrs. Carter, "but here's what I want you to hear. That's not stupidity. That's the cost of being the kind of person who loves openly. And the alternative living closed, suspicious, never trusting anyone fully, that cost is even higher." She paused. "You were not foolish for loving. She was wicked for taking advantage of it. Don't confuse her sin for yours." That night, after the girls were in bed, Faith sat at her kitchen window with a notebook and wrote down everything she remembered, every warning sign she'd dismissed, every moment that had felt slightly off, every time Zara had redirected a conversation or subtly repositioned Daniel's perception of her. She wrote it not as an act of grief, but as an act of education. She was learning who she was, and who she would never allow to touch her life again. It happened on a Thursday morning, 6 months after they'd been thrown out. Emma had been working on a school project, a short presentation about someone she admired. Faith had assumed she'd choose a singer or a fictional character, the way most 8-year-olds did. Instead, Emma stood up in front of her class and talked about her mother. Her teacher later emailed Faith about it, and Faith read the email 3 times before she could finish it without her vision blurring. Emma spoke about how her mum started a business from scratch after a very difficult time. She said, and I'm quoting directly here, "My mum was knocked down, but she got up because we needed her. And then she just kept going because she found out she wanted to." Faith pressed the phone against her chest and stood very still in the middle of her small kitchen. She found out she wanted to. Yes, that was exactly it. Emma had seen something Faith was still only just beginning to see in herself. That she had begun this new life in survival mode, doing what she had to do, and somewhere along the way, without quite noticing the transition, she had shifted into choosing it, choosing the business, choosing the independence, choosing the small, hard, proud life she was building with her own 2 hands. That evening, she took both girls to the small park near their flat and pushed them on the swings until all 3 of them were laughing, and the laughter felt real in a way that laughter hadn't felt in a long time. Chloe, swinging higher and higher, screamed with delight into the open sky. And something in Faith's chest, something that had been clenched tight for months, finally, slowly released. James came to find Faith on a Saturday morning, 7 months after the night she'd been thrown out. He looked uncomfortable standing on her doorstep, this quiet, solid man from Daniel's world, materializing in hers, holding a folder of printed documents like a man delivering something he wasn't sure would be welcome. "I'm sorry to come without warning," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd see me if I asked first." "Probably not," Faith admitted. "Come in." She made coffee, he spread the documents on her kitchen table, and then, quietly and methodically, James told her everything. Zara's previous relationship, the same pattern, different people. The discovery about the property asset. The financial angle that had run beneath the surface of Zara's entire campaign. The timeline of manipulation, which James had pieced together through conversations and a few things Daniel himself had mentioned, without knowing their significance. Faith listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Does Daniel know any of this?" she asked. "Some of it. I started telling him last week." James paused. He didn't take it well, but he's not dismissing it either. "What is Zara doing?" "Reacting," James said. "Which means it's working. She knows I've been looking into her. She's been trying to manage Daniel's perception of me. But Daniel's already doubting her, she's been. He searched for the word, suffocating. He can feel it, even if he doesn't fully understand it yet." Faith looked at the documents on her table, at the clear, documented proof of a betrayal that had been years in the making. She had known Zara had been calculating. She hadn't known it had been quite this calculated. "What do you want me to do with this?" she asked. "Whatever you think is right," James said. "But I thought you deserved to know all of it. And I thought—" He stopped. "Daniel deserves to know all of it too. And I think he might actually listen now." Faith picked up one of the documents, looked at it. "He threw his daughters out of their home," she said. "Yes," James said. He did. It unraveled faster than Zara expected. When you spend years controlling a narrative, you don't account sufficiently for the moment when the narrative slips from your hands. Zara had managed Daniel so carefully for so long that she'd stopped seeing him as someone who might eventually stop being manageable. He confronted her with what James had told him on a Tuesday evening. Quietly, Daniel was always quiet, but with a stillness that was different from his usual passivity. This was the stillness of someone who had made up their mind. "I want you to explain this," he said, setting the documents on the counter between them. Zara looked at them, assessed, recalibrated. She tried several approaches in quick succession confusion, then injured dignity, then a careful reframing of every fact as misrepresentation or jealousy on James's part. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. But Daniel had been watching her perform these moves for months now, and he could finally see them as performance. The scales, once they begin to tip, fall the rest of the way quickly. "Stop," he said, and the word came out with a weight that surprised both of them. She stopped. "I want you to leave," he said. The scene that followed was not quiet. Zara did not leave gracefully. She said things sharp, aimed things, designed to wound, and some of them landed because she knew exactly where to aim. But Daniel did not move from the doorway, and eventually, with the precision of a woman who understood when a situation was no longer salvageable, Zara picked up her bag and left. Within a week, the wider world began to understand why. The person she had defrauded in the previous situation, emboldened perhaps by some invisible shift in the atmosphere, came forward. The financial manoeuvring around Daniel's property asset was flagged by his solicitor during a routine review. Zara's name appeared in contexts she had spent considerable effort keeping it out of. She left the area entirely within the month. And just like that, the woman who had laughed as she locked the door on a mother and her two small daughters, the woman who had been so certain she had taken everything, had nothing left. 8 months after the night they'd been thrown out, Faith heard a knock at her door on a Sunday afternoon. She was in the kitchen, packaging a double order of lemon tarts for a client who had found her through a third recommendation, and Emma was reading on the sofa, and Chloe was drawing at the table, and the flat smelled of warm pastry and the lavender diffuser Mrs. Carter had given them as a housewarming gift. It was a good afternoon, a quiet, decent, earned afternoon. She opened the door. Daniel stood there. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically, he hadn't changed much in 8 months, but in some essential way, the air around him was diminished. The easy confidence that had once been part of how he held himself was gone, replaced by something careful and hunched and very tired. He was holding a bag that, Faith recognized after a moment, contained some of the girls' things, toys and books, and a stuffed elephant named Gerald that Chloe had been grieving quietly for months. "I didn't know what they might have missed," he said. Emma appeared at Faith's shoulder, and she felt the small body go rigid, the held breath, the old hope, and the wariness around it. "I am," Daniel said softly. Emma didn't answer immediately. Then, "Hi, can I?" Daniel looked at Faith. "Could I talk to you? I won't take long. I'll stay out here if you want." Faith studied him for a moment. The man who had opened a door and turned his back, the man who had chosen a locked room over his daughter's outstretched hands. She felt all of it, every bit of it. And she felt, beneath it, not forgiveness exactly, but something adjacent to it, the beginning of a possibility. "The girls will take the bag. she said. "You and I can talk." They sat on the low wall outside the building because Faith did not invite him in. The afternoon light was long and golden. A cat wandered past. From up above came the muffled sound of Chloe discovering Gerald inside the bag and producing a sound of such pure, complete joy that something crossed Daniel's face that looked very much like it cost him. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he began. "Good," Faith said simply. "I know what I did. I've had a lot of time to know what I did." He paused. "James told you everything, I think, about what she was doing, what she'd planned. He did. I want you to know that it doesn't make it better. She manipulated me, yes, but I let myself be manipulated. I was looking for a reason. He stopped. I was cowardly, Faith, about things that were hard in our marriage, about saying what I actually felt. It was easier to be turned against you than to talk to you. And I am ashamed of that." Faith looked at the street in front of them. At the ordinary Sunday afternoon world, carrying on a man, walking a dog, a child on a bicycle, 2 women talking on a step. "You threw your daughters out," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact she needed him to say out loud. "Yes, Chloe reached for you." His voice broke slightly. "Yes. And you turned away." "Yes." The word was barely a sound. A long silence. "I have spent 8 months," Faith said, "building something from nothing. I've learned how to feed my children on what I earn with my own hands. I've learned that I am more capable and more resilient and more myself than I ever was when I was relying on someone else's version of who I was supposed to be." She looked at him. "I am not the same woman you pushed out that door. She's gone." "I know," he said. "I can see that. What is it you want, Daniel?" He looked at her. "I want to know if there's any version of a future in which my daughters will let me be in their lives. I want to make it right with them. I know I can't make it right with you. I don't think I have any right to even ask that." A pause. "But I want to be their father again, if they'll have me." Faith was quiet for a long moment. "That's not my decision to make," she said finally. "Emma is 8 and Chloe is 6, and they are old enough to have feelings that belong to them. If you want a relationship with your daughters, you work on it with them, slowly, on their terms. Not because I permitted it, but because you earn it." He nodded. "And Daniel..." She waited until he looked at her. "If you ever put anything or anyone above their well-being again, that will be the end of it. I won't negotiate that point." "Understood," he said quietly. "I understand." He left 20 minutes later. He did not ask to come back in. He did not push for more than he had been given. And Faith watched him go, and felt something settle in her, not triumph, not grief, but a kind of finality that was almost peaceful. It was the feeling of a chapter ending cleanly. He came back, not to Faith, to his daughters. Slowly, on their terms, exactly as she had said. The first meeting was 15 minutes at the park, with Faith present, during which Emma barely looked at him, and Chloe eventually, cautiously, showed him a drawing she'd done of a cat. The second meeting was a little longer. The third involved an ice cream, and something that, at the end, was almost a smile from Emma. It was not fast. It was not easy. There were sessions, at the recommendation of a kind and practical therapist, where Emma said things to her father that she'd been holding for 8 months, and he sat with them without deflecting. There were tears, his, hers, both, and there was repair of the slow, incremental, unglamorous kind. But it was real. Faith did not go back to him. She never seriously considered it. Not because she hadn't loved him, she had fully for years. But because she understood now, with the clarity that only comes from surviving something, that what she had built in these 8 months could not be traded in, could not be returned to a version of herself that waited for someone else to make things stable. She had her business, which was growing. She had her daughters, who were growing too differently than they might have otherwise, but with something in them now that would serve them their whole lives. The lived knowledge that their mother had been struck down and had gotten back up and had kept going and had not been bitter about it and had built something from the rubble with her bare hands and her refusal to stop. She had Mrs. Carter, who came to dinner every Sunday and who had become, without any formal declaration, the grandmother the girls had never had nearby. She had herself, fully, finally, unapologetically herself. One evening, almost exactly a year after the night she'd stood barefoot on the cold ground outside her former home, Faith sat at her kitchen table after the girls were in bed and opened her notebook. She turned to a fresh page. At the top she wrote, "What I know now." And then she wrote for a long time. Emma won a writing competition at school. The story she submitted was about a woman made of clay who got broken and remade herself into something stronger. Chloe asked, on a Tuesday evening, if they could get a cat. Faith said, probably. Chloe named the probable cat Gerald 2 preemptively. The bakery business had a waiting list. Mrs. Carter's birthday was celebrated with a cake that took Faith 3 attempts to get right, a dark chocolate and orange thing that, when Mrs. Carter tasted it, made her close her eyes and sit very still for a moment, in the way people do when something is better than they expected. "This," Mrs. Carter said, opening her eyes, "is what you were always capable of. You just needed the room." Faith smiled. She thought about Zara occasionally, not often, not with malice, but the way you think about a storm that damaged your roof. Aware of what it cost, quietly grateful for the rebuilt thing that's stronger now because of how carefully you reconstructed it. She did not wish Zara ill. She did not wish her well either. She simply didn't think about her much, and that, she had come to understand, was its own kind of victory. Not every friend is truly a friend. Some people wear the costume of friendship while they study you, measure you, and wait patiently for the moment your life is most useful to them. They are patient because they are calculated, and they are calculated because they are afraid that what you have was never meant for them, and that the only way to possess it is to take it. Betrayal may break you, but the breaking is not the end. It is, if you let it be, the beginning of a rebuilding that is more yours than anything that came before. When someone destroys the life you were handed, they accidentally force you to build the life you were always capable of. And what is taken through deceit will never last. Because things that are stolen have no roots. They sit in the thief's hands, but they do not belong there. And sooner or later, the truth of that surfaces in the sleepless nights, in the controlled relationship that turns suffocating, in the document on a kitchen counter, that a quiet man places down and cannot be talked away. Zara took Faith's house, her husband, her sense of safety, her trust, but she could not take what Faith built from the ground up, in the cold, in the dark, with two small girls pressed against her sides and nothing but her own refusal to disappear. That belonged to Faith alone. And nothing, no door, no lock, no wicked laughter could ever take it back. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next powerful story. Coming up next, we have another incredible story that will leave you speechless. You won't want to miss it. Like this video, drop a comment below and tell us what moment in this story resonated with you the most. Have you or someone you know faced a situation where neighbors or community turned their backs when help was needed most? Share your thoughts. We read every single comment. See you in the next video. God bless you. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.